The scorching sun disappeared behind the horizon, leaving Violet Thorne stranded in the vast, unforgiving New Mexico desert with nothing but the tattered remains of her once beautiful dress and the haunting knowledge that she had been left to die. Her stagecoach had been ambushed by bandits 4 hours earlier, the driver and her fellow passengers callously murdered while she had been dragged away, robbed of her valuables, and abandoned miles from any settlement in the growing darkness of an October evening in 1878. The temperature plummeted rapidly as night descended, transforming the blistering heat of day into a bone-chilling cold that made Violet's teeth chatter. Her thin cotton dress offered little protection, and the only source of warmth was the anger that coursed through her veins. Barely 22 years old, she refused to accept this cruel twist of fate after traveling so far from Boston to start a new life as a schoolteacher in Santa Fe. "I will not die here," she whispered fiercely, wrapping her arms around herself as she trudged forward, following what she hoped was the direction of the main trail. Her once pristine boots were now scuffed and filled with sand, her auburn hair falling loose from its carefully constructed bun. The moonlight cast eerie shadows across the desert landscape, transforming cacti into menacing sentinels and causing Violet to flinch at every sound. Hours passed as she stumbled through the darkness, her throat parched and her stomach empty. The night was growing colder, and exhaustion threatened to overtake her, but Violet knew that stopping meant certain death. The desert nights claimed many lives, especially those unprepared for their harsh reality. Just as her legs began to give way beneath her, a sound carried on the wind the distant rhythm of hoofbeats. At first, Violet thought her mind was playing cruel tricks, but the sound grew louder with each passing moment. Fear and hope battled within her. The rider could be her salvation or another threat in this lawless territory. With the last of her strength, Violet scrambled to the crest of a small ridge, waving her arms frantically as a dark silhouette appeared, horse and rider moving as one through the silver-bathed landscape. "Help!" she cried, her voice cracking from thirst. "Please help me." The rider pulled his horse to an abrupt halt, dust swirling around them like phantoms in the moonlight. For a terrifying moment, he said nothing, simply staring at her from beneath the brim of his wide hat. "Madam," his voice was deep, cautious. "What in God's name are you doing out here alone?" Violet took a stumbling step forward. "Bandits," she managed to say before her knees finally buckled. She expected to hit the hard ground, but strong arms caught her before she fell. In one fluid motion, the stranger lifted her onto his horse and mounted behind her, one arm securely around her waist as he turned his horse toward the west. "I've got you," he said quietly, his breath warm against her ear. "You're safe now." The gentle sway of the horse beneath her and the solid presence of the stranger at her back were the last things Violet registered before unconsciousness claimed her. When Violet awoke, the first rays of dawn were filtering through the cracks of a crude wooden shelter. She lay on a bedroll near a small fire, a rough woolen blanket tucked around her. For a moment, disorientation clouded her mind before the memories of the previous day came rushing back with frightening clarity. She sat up abruptly, wincing at the pain that shot through her sunburned skin and aching muscles. "Easy there," came that same deep voice from the night before. "You're pretty beat up." Violet turned to find her rescuer crouched by the fire, pouring steaming coffee into a tin cup. In the soft morning light, she could finally see him clearly, tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-bronzed skin and piercing blue eyes that contrasted sharply with his dark hair. He appeared to be in his late 20s, his face weathered by the elements but handsome in a rugged way that men from Boston could never achieve. "Where am I? Who are you?" Violet asked, accepting the cup he offered with trembling hands. "Name's Isaac Yates," he replied, settling back on his heels. "Most folks call me Ike. This is my line shack. I work for the Circle M Ranch about 20 miles south of here." He gestured vaguely with his cup. And you'd be Violet Thorne, she replied, sipping the strong, bitter coffee gratefully. I was traveling to Santa Fe to take a position as a schoolteacher when our stagecoach was attacked yesterday afternoon. Isaac's expression darkened. The Blackwater gang's been hitting stages in these parts for months now. Sheriff can't catch him, and the army won't bother. He studied her face. Anyone else survive? Violet shook her head, unexpected tears filling her eyes as she recalled the horrific scene. They killed everyone else. The driver, an elderly couple, a businessman. They dragged me away, took everything I had, and left me to die in the desert. Bastards, Isaac muttered, then quickly added, Pardon my language, Miss Thorne. Despite everything, Violet found herself smiling faintly at his automatic apology. I believe the situation warrants stronger language, Mr. Yates. A hint of a smile touched his lips. Just Ike is fine. He rose to his feet, moving to a small wooden crate where he rummaged briefly before returning with jerky and hardtack. It's not much, but you need to eat. Violet accepted the simple fare gratefully. As she ate, she took in her surroundings. The small one-room shack was sparsely furnished but clean, with a narrow cot against one wall, a rough-hewn table with a single chair, and various tools of the cowboy trade hanging from pegs. What were you doing out here in the middle of the night? She asked between bites. Isaac settled on the edge of the cot. Tracking strays. We lost some cattle in the last storm, and the boss wants them found before rustlers get em. He shrugged. Got caught out later than I meant to. Then I'm fortunate for your dedication to your work, Violet said quietly. Reckon so. His eyes met hers briefly before looking away. I'll take you to the main ranch today. Mrs. Monroe, the owner's wife, will help get you fixed up proper. Then we can figure out how to get you to Santa Fe, if that's still where you're headed. Violet nodded, though uncertainty clouded her thoughts. All her possessions, including the letter confirming her teaching position, were gone. She had no money, no clothes save what she wore, and no way to prove her identity or credentials when she arrived in Santa Fe. As if reading her thoughts, Isaac spoke again. Don't worry yourself sick just yet. One step at a time. They departed an hour later, Violet riding behind Isaac on his sturdy bay gelding. The morning sun beat down mercilessly as they traversed the desert landscape, but Violet found herself noticing beauty where before she had seen only desolation. The delicate blooms of cacti, the graceful flight of hawks circling overhead, the distant purple mountains rising majestically against the azure sky. Have you worked at the Circle M long? She asked, trying to distract herself from the discomfort of the ride and the proximity of this man she barely knew but on whom she was completely dependent. 5 years now, Isaac replied. Came west after the war. Wasn't much left for me back in Missouri. You fought in the Civil War. Violet calculated quickly he must have been very young. Last year of it. Joined up at 17. His tone didn't invite further questions on the subject. My father and brother fought as well, she offered instead. For the Union. Father came home, but Thomas didn't. Isaac was quiet for a moment. I'm sorry to hear that. Lost my brother too. Different sides, same war. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. And yet here we are, Violet said softly. Here we are, he agreed, glancing back at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. They rode in companionable silence after that, until the landscape began to change, becoming greener as they approached a creek lined with cottonwood trees. In the distance, Violet could make out buildings, a large ranch house, barns, corrals, and bunkhouses. Circle M, Isaac announced as they crested a small hill. Home sweet home. Their arrival at the ranch caused quite a stir. Cowboys paused in their work to stare openly as Isaac helped Violet dismount in front of the main house. Her legs nearly gave out after the long ride, and he kept a steadying hand on her elbow as a tall, silver-haired woman hurried down the porch steps. "Isaac Yates, what on earth?" the woman exclaimed, her keen eyes taking in Violet's disheveled appearance and torn clothing. "Mrs. Monroe, this is Miss Violet Thorne," Isaac explained. "Found her stranded in the desert last night. Stagecoach was hit by the Blackwater gang." Martha Monroe's expression softened immediately. "You poor dear. Come inside right away." The next few hours passed in a blur for Violet. Mrs. Monroe proved to be a force of nature, organizing a bath, clean clothes, food, and a comfortable bed in a spare room with efficient kindness. By evening, Violet found herself dressed in a borrowed dress that was slightly too large but blessedly clean, seated at the Monroe family dinner table alongside Mr. and Mrs. Monroe, their daughter Eliza, and, to her surprise, Isaac. "Miss Thorne was headed to Santa Fe to teach," Isaac explained as they ate. "Lost everything in the attack." Frederick Monroe, a distinguished man in his 60s with a neatly trimmed beard, frowned deeply. "Disgraceful business. The territory's becoming lawless." He turned to Violet. "You're welcome to stay here until we can arrange safe passage to Santa Fe, my dear." "Or," Martha Monroe interjected with a meaningful glance at her husband, "we might have a proposition for you." Violet set down her fork. "A proposition?" Frederick nodded. "As it happens, we've been looking for a teacher for the children on the ranch and from the neighboring properties. We've got nearly 15 youngsters of school age with no proper education. The nearest school is in Silverdale, 20 miles away. We were planning to convert the old foreman's cabin into a schoolhouse," Martha continued eagerly. "It would be a modest position, of course, but it would include room and board, and you'd be doing a tremendous service." Violet was speechless. Just hours ago, she had been certain her future was lost along with her possessions. Now, an unexpected opportunity had presented itself. I don't know what to say," she managed finally. "Say you'll consider it," Frederick urged. "At least until you can make arrangements in Santa Fe, if that's still your preference." From across the table, Violet caught Isaac watching her, his expression unreadable. When their eyes met, he looked down at his plate. "I would be honored to consider your offer, Mr. Monroe," Violet said, feeling as though fate had handed her a second chance. Later that evening, unable to sleep despite her exhaustion, Violet stepped out onto the porch, breathing in the cool night air. The vast expanse of stars overhead took her breath away, so different from the narrow slice of sky visible between Boston's crowded buildings. "Can't sleep," Isaac's voice startled her. He emerged from the shadows at the end of the porch, a cigarette glowing faintly between his fingers. "It seems strange to be in a bed after." She gestured vaguely, unable to articulate the tumultuous events of the past day. Isaac nodded, leaning against a post. "You thinking of taking the Monroe's offer?" "I don't know," Violet admitted. "It's unexpected, but perhaps fortuitous. I need to earn my way, and this would allow me to do that while I decide my next steps." "The kids here need schooling," Isaac said quietly. "Most of the hands can barely write their own names. Would be a good thing, having someone like you around." Violet studied him in the moonlight, struck by the contrast between his rugged exterior and the gentle consideration in his voice. "Someone like me?" He looked almost embarrassed. "Educated, refined, different." His eyes met hers. "Someone who sees beauty in things the rest of us take for granted." His perception surprised her. "I never thought of myself that way." "Maybe you should." He straightened, dropping his cigarette and crushing it beneath his boot. "I'll be riding into Silverdale tomorrow to report the stagecoach attack to the sheriff. If you want, I could ask about your position in Santa Fe, see if they're still expecting you." The offer was considerate, yet Violet felt an unexpected reluctance at the thought of confirming her Santa Fe position. That would be kind, thank you. Isaac tipped his hat slightly. Get some rest, Miss Thorne. You've had quite an ordeal. As he walked away toward the bunkhouse, Violet called after him. Thank you, Isaac, for saving my life. He paused, looking back at her. Anyone would have done the same. But it wasn't anyone, she replied. It was you. In the darkness, she couldn't see his expression, but she felt the weight of his gaze before he nodded once and continued on his way. The next morning, Violet woke to find the ranch already bustling with activity. After breakfast, Martha Monroe showed her to the former foreman's cabin, a sturdy structure that stood empty a short distance from the main house. Harold built himself a new place when he got married last year, Martha explained as they entered. We've been using this for storage, but it wouldn't take much to convert it to a schoolroom. Violet walked through the cabin, mentally arranging desks and a blackboard. The main room was spacious enough for 15 students, and a smaller room at the back could serve as her living quarters. Large windows would provide ample light, and a stone fireplace would keep the space warm in winter. It's perfect, she said, surprising herself with her enthusiasm. Martha beamed. I was hoping you'd think so. The children are so excited at the prospect of a real teacher. They've been making do with whatever lessons the mothers can provide. But none of us have your training. I haven't accepted the position yet. Violet reminded her gently. Of course not, Martha agreed, though her eyes twinkled knowingly. But I have a feeling about you, Miss Thorne. I think you might find that fate has brought you exactly where you're meant to be. After returning to the main house, Violet spent the afternoon helping Martha with household tasks, grateful for the opportunity to feel useful. When Isaac returned from Silverdale late in the day, she was hanging laundry in the yard, her borrowed dress protected by a large apron, her hair tied back with a ribbon. He dismounted slowly, and something in his expression made Violet's heart beat faster. Did you speak with the sheriff? She asked as he approached. Isaac nodded, removing his hat. He'll send men to recover the bodies, and I sent a telegram to Santa Fe. He hesitated. The school board received word that you never arrived on the expected stage. They've hired someone else. Violet absorbed this news, waiting for the disappointment to crash over her. Instead, she felt an odd sense of relief. I see. I'm sorry, Isaac said, watching her carefully. Don't be, she replied, surprising them both with her smile. Perhaps Mrs. Monroe was right about fate. A slow smile spread across Isaac's face, transforming his features. Does that mean you're staying? It seems I am, at least for now. The weeks that followed were among the busiest of Violet's life. With enthusiastic help from the ranch hands, the foreman's cabin was quickly transformed into a schoolhouse. Rough-hewn benches and tables served as desks, and Frederick Monroe ordered books and supplies from Denver. Violet's small living quarters were furnished simply but comfortably, providing her first real home since leaving Boston. Word spread quickly about the new school at Circle M Ranch, and families from neighboring properties eagerly enrolled their children. By the time Violet officially began teaching in early November, she had 18 students ranging in age from 6 to 16. Throughout these preparations, Isaac Yates remained a constant presence. Though his duties often took him away from the ranch, he always found time to help with the schoolhouse construction, bringing Violet wildflowers he'd gathered on the range or interesting rocks for her science lessons. His formal manner gradually relaxed around her, revealing a quick wit and intelligence that belied his limited formal education. Violet found herself looking forward to their conversations, sometimes lingering on the porch after supper, just to hear his stories of life on the frontier. In turn, she shared books with him from the small library Frederick Monroe had assembled, delighting in Isaac's thoughtful observations. One evening in early December, as the first snow dusted the mountains in the distance, Isaac found Violet alone on the porch, wrapped in a woolen shawl as she gazed at the stars. "Cold night to be stargazing," he commented, settling beside her on the bench. "I never tire of this sky," she replied. "In Boston, buildings and smoke obscured most of the stars. Here, the heavens feel close enough to touch." Isaac studied her profile in the lamplight spilling from the window. "You don't miss the city?" Violet considered the question seriously. "I miss certain conveniences. Hot running water, libraries, theater." She smiled. "But I've found things here that I never knew I was missing." "Such as?" His voice was quiet, almost hesitant. "Space to breathe. A community that truly needs me." She turned to face him. "Friends who accept me as I am." Something shifted in Isaac's expression. "Is that what we are? Friends?" The question hung between them, weighted with unspoken possibilities. Violet's heart raced as she realized the conversation had moved into dangerous territory. "What would you have us be, Isaac?" she asked softly. He looked down at his hands, strong and calloused from years of ranch work. "I'm not an educated man, Violet. I can't offer you the kind of life you had back east." "I never asked for that life," she countered. "If I had wanted it, I would have stayed in Boston, married the banker's son my father selected, and lived out my days as a society matron." Isaac's head snapped up. "There was someone in Boston?" "A suitor my father approved of," Violet clarified. "Not someone I loved." "And what about now?" Isaac asked, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Is there someone you could love here, in this wilderness?" Violet felt the world narrow to just the two of them, the night air electric with possibility. "I believe there could be," she answered truthfully, "if he were brave enough to ask." Isaac's hand, warm and solid, found hers in the darkness. "I've faced armed bandits and stampeding cattle with less fear than I'm feeling right now," he admitted with a rueful smile. "But I'd rather die a coward than live wondering what might have been." Before Violet could respond, shouts erupted from the direction of the bunkhouse. Isaac was on his feet instantly, his hand dropping to the revolver at his hip as ranch hands poured from the bunkhouse, pointing toward the horizon where an ominous orange glow illuminated the night sky. "Fire," Isaac said grimly, "at the north pasture. Lightning must have struck during that squall earlier." He turned to Violet. "Stay here. I need to go." Within minutes, every able-bodied man on the ranch was mounted and riding toward the blaze, leaving Violet and the other women to prepare bandages and water for their return. The bitter irony of another interruption just as her relationship with Isaac seemed poised to change wasn't lost on her. The men didn't return until dawn, exhausted and smoke-stained but successful in containing the fire before it reached the ranch buildings. Isaac was among the last to ride in, his face and hands blackened with soot, his eyes red from smoke. Violet rushed to meet him as he dismounted stiffly. "Are you hurt?" she asked, helping him toward the well where a bucket of clean water waited. "Nothing serious," he assured her, though he winced as he sat on the edge of the well. "Just tired and sore." Violet dipped a clean cloth in the water and gently began washing the soot from his face. His eyes remained fixed on hers as she worked, neither of them speaking of the conversation that had been interrupted the night before. When Frederick Monroe approached to get Isaac's report on the fire damage, Violet reluctantly stepped away, returning to the house to help Martha prepare food for the exhausted firefighters. The moment between them had passed, and the business of the ranch took precedence. December progressed, bringing Christmas preparations and an unexpected cold snap that kept everyone close to hearth and home. Violet threw herself into planning a Christmas pageant with her students, creating costumes from whatever materials they could find and practicing carols to perform for their families. Isaac continued his duties, which increasingly took him away from the ranch as winter storms threatened the cattle in distant pastures. When their paths did cross, they were rarely alone, and a new awkwardness had developed between them as if both were waiting for the other to acknowledge what had almost been said that night on the porch. 3 days before Christmas, the worst blizzard in recent memory descended on the territory. Frederick Monroe had sent most of the hands, including Isaac, to move the cattle to sheltered valleys the day before, and now anxiety gripped the ranch as the men failed to return. "They'll have taken shelter," Martha assured Violet as they peered through frosted windows at the whiteout conditions. "Isaac knows these lands better than anyone. He'll keep them safe." Violet nodded, though fear clutched at her heart. The temperature had plummeted to dangerous levels, and the wind howled like a living thing around the ranch buildings. Even the short walk from the schoolhouse to the main house had been treacherous that morning. The storm continued unabated for 2 days. On Christmas Eve, just as hope began to wane, the sound of horses nickering in the yard brought everyone running to the windows. Through the swirling snow, shadowy figures emerged, the missing ranch hands, leading their exhausted horses, their faces concealed by frost-covered scarves. Violet counted frantically as they stumbled into the warmth of the house. 12 men had gone out. 11 now stood in Martha Monroe's kitchen, gratefully accepting hot coffee and blankets. "Where's Isaac?" Violet asked, her voice rising with panic as she scanned the frostbitten faces. Tom Jenkins, the senior hand, removed his ice-encrusted hat. "He stayed behind with the herd. Cave we found wasn't big enough for all the men and the cattle we managed to gather. He sent us back, said he'd follow when the storm broke." "Alone? In this?" Violet couldn't comprehend the madness of it. "Said someone had to stay with the cattle," Tom explained wearily. "Wouldn't hear otherwise." Frederick Monroe placed a comforting hand on Violet's shoulder. "Isaac knows what he's doing, Miss Thorne. He's survived worse than this." But as night fell and the storm intensified again, Violet couldn't silence her fears. While the ranch celebrated the men's safe return with a modest Christmas Eve supper, she found herself repeatedly drawn to the windows, straining to see through the darkness and swirling snow. After the meal, as families gathered in the parlor to exchange small gifts and sing carols, Violet slipped away, returning to her quarters in the schoolhouse. The small room felt empty and cold despite the fire she built in the stove. Taking out her journal, she tried to distract herself by writing, but her thoughts remained with Isaac, alone in the wilderness on Christmas Eve. A sudden gust rattled the windows, and Violet looked up, certain she had heard something beyond the wind. Setting aside her journal, she moved to the window, wiping away the frost to peer into the darkness. At first, she saw nothing but the swirling snow illuminated by her lamplight. Then, a shadow moved at the edge of visibility, a horse and rider, moving slowly through the deep drifts toward the schoolhouse. Without stopping for a coat, Violet flung open the door and rushed into the bitter cold. The figure drew closer, the horse plodding wearily through snow that reached its chest. "Isaac!" Violet called, her voice nearly lost in the howling wind. The rider's head lifted at the sound of her voice. It was indeed Isaac, nearly unrecognizable beneath layers of ice and snow. He dismounted stiffly, stumbling as his feet hit the deep snow. Violet rushed forward, helping to support him as he led his horse toward the small stable attached to the schoolhouse. "The cattle?" she asked as they worked together to unsaddle the exhausted animal and provide it with hay and water. "Safe," Isaac managed through cracked lips. "Storm. Shifting. Thought I could make it back." Once the horse was tended to, Violet helped Isaac to the schoolhouse, alarmed by how heavily he leaned on her. Inside, she sat him by the stove and began removing his frozen outer layers. "Should have stayed put," she scolded gently, working to remove his ice-encrusted gloves. "Why risk the journey in this weather?" Isaac's eyes, red-rimmed and exhausted, met hers. "Didn't want to spend Christmas alone," he said simply. "Not when I finally found something worth celebrating." Violet's hands stilled. "Isaac, I've been a coward," he continued, his voice strengthening. "That night on the porch, before the fire interrupted us, I was finally going to tell you how I feel. Then every time I saw you after, the words wouldn't come." Violet knelt before him, taking his cold hands in hers. "Then tell me now." Isaac's gaze held hers steadily. "I love you, Violet Thorne. Have since the moment I found you in that desert, standing there like you were daring the whole territory to try and break you." A smile touched his chapped lips. "Knew right then you were different from any woman I'd ever met." Joy welled up inside Violet, so intense it brought tears to her eyes. "I love you too, Isaac Yates, my cowboy who rode through the darkness and saved me when I thought all was lost." Heedless of his chilled state, Isaac pulled her into his arms, his lips finding hers in a kiss that melted away the last barriers between them. When they finally parted, both breathless, he pressed his forehead to hers. "Merry Christmas, Miss Thorne," he whispered. "Merry Christmas, Mr. Yates," she replied, her heart overflowing with happiness. Spring came early to New Mexico Territory in 1879, transforming the desert landscape with wildflowers and new growth. The Circle M Ranch prospered under Frederick Monroe's leadership, its school now recognized as one of the finest educational opportunities in the territory. On a perfect May afternoon, with the mountains gleaming in the distance, Violet Thorne became Violet Yates in a ceremony beneath the cottonwood trees by the creek. The entire ranch gathered to celebrate, along with families from neighboring properties, and even a few former students who had traveled from as far as Santa Fe for the occasion. "Never thought I'd see the day Isaac Yates got himself hitched," Tom Jenkins commented to Frederick Monroe as they watched the couple's first dance together at the reception. "That boy was wild as the wind when he first showed up here." Frederick nodded thoughtfully. "Amazing what the right woman can do for a man's perspective." He raised his glass. "To new beginnings." Later, as the celebration continued under lantern light, Isaac led his bride away from the crowds, helping her mount his bay gelding before swinging up behind her. "Where are we going?" Violet asked, leaning back against his chest as they rode slowly through the moonlit landscape. "Thought you might like to see our home," Isaac replied, his arms secure around her waist. They rode for nearly 20 minutes before cresting a small hill that overlooked a valley with a creek running through it. In the moonlight, Violet could make out the shape of a cabin nestled among trees, smoke curling from its chimney. "When did you build this?" she asked in amazement as they approached. "Been working on it since Christmas," Isaac admitted. "The Monroes gave me this parcel as a wedding gift. Close enough to the ranch for your teaching. But," he hesitated, suddenly uncertain, "I thought you might like having our own place." Tears pricked Violet's eyes as Isaac helped her dismount and led her to the cabin door. Inside, she found a simple but beautifully crafted home, a main room with a stone fireplace, a kitchen area with a cast-iron stove, and through an open door, a bedroom with a handmade quilt on the bed. "It's perfect," she whispered, turning to embrace her husband. "Our own home." Isaac's arms tightened around her. "Never thought I'd have this," he confessed, his voice rough with emotion. "A home, a wife, a future worth fighting for." Violet reached up to touch his face. "That night in the desert, when you found me, I was certain my life was ending. Instead, it was just beginning." "Funny how fate works," Isaac murmured before lowering his lips to hers. Outside, the desert night enfolded their new home in silence, the stars witnessing the beginning of a love story that had started in darkness but would continue in the light of days to come. For Violet and Isaac Yates, The wilderness that had once threatened to separate them had become the foundation of their shared future, wild and unpredictable, but filled with beauty and possibility. 5 years later, as Violet watched her husband teaching their young son to ride his first pony in the yard of their expanded homestead, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The schoolhouse at Circle M Ranch now had a dedicated teacher, one of Violet's former students, allowing her to focus on raising their children and writing stories of frontier life that were beginning to gain recognition in Eastern publications. Isaac had become foreman of the Circle M, respected throughout the territory for his fair dealings and innovative ranching methods. Their home had grown to accommodate their family, 3-year-old Thomas, named for Violet's lost brother, and 6-month-old Charlotte, whose auburn hair promised to match her mother's. Life in the territory remained challenging at times, but the love that had sparked in the desert darkness had only strengthened with each passing season, proving that sometimes being thrown into the wilderness was not an ending, but the beginning of the greatest adventure of all.